As I said a couple weeks ago, the world that we live in very much looks like David's world in Psalm 9 and 10. People living how they want to live, doing whatever they want to do, and it causing all kinds of problems because they don't believe that there's a God. And even if they do believe there's a God, they don't believe they'll have to give an account for it. But for those of us who do believe in God and have to live in this world, we can feel like God has abandoned us at times. Before we get into the psalm, I want us to notice something about it. David begins with this prayer in verses 1 and 2, and then he finishes it off at the end of the psalm in verses 12 to 18. But sandwiched right in between in verses 3 through 11, we have this portrait description of the wicked man. And David is describing why he's praying. So let's go ahead and get into the psalm. Psalm 10, verse 1. Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble? The wicked in his pride persecutes the poor. Let them be caught in the plots in which they have devised. For the wicked boasts in his heart's desire. He blesses the greedy and renounces the Lord. The wicked in his proud countenance does not seek God. God is in none of his thoughts. His ways are always prospering. Your judgments are far off, out of his sight. As for all his enemies, he snares at them. He has said in his heart, I shall not be moved. I will never be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing and deceit and oppression. Under his tongue is trouble and iniquity. He sits in the lurking places of the villages. In the secret places he murders the innocent. His eyes are secretly fixed on the helpless. He lies in wait secretly as a lion in his den. He lies in wait to catch the poor. He catches the poor when he draws him into his net. And so he crouches, he lies low, that the helpless may fall by his strength. He has said in his heart, God is forgotten. He hides his face, he will never see. Arise, O Lord. O God, lift up your hand. Do not forget the humble. Why do the wicked renounce God? He says in his heart, you will not require an account. But you have seen, for you observe trouble and grief. To repay it by your hand, the helpless commits himself to you. You are the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness until you find none. The Lord is king forever and ever. The nations have perished out of his land. Lord, you have heard the desire of the humble. You will prepare their heart. You will cause your ear to hear, to do justice to the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may oppress no more. And so David's living in this world and he feels abandoned, alone, like God's keeping his distance. He's not the only one that's ever felt that way. You have men like Elijah and Habakkuk and Job and even Jesus at some point. So if you've ever felt that way, or you feel that way, just know that you're in pretty good company. But like David, we need to turn to God and plead for help. He's hurting because of the wicked and his pride, and he's abusing his power. And they're persecuting not the strongest, but the most vulnerable and the helpless. They're cowards, and that's kind of just the way of the wicked. And so he asked God to turn his devices around on him, like how Hagar was hung by his own gallows. Look at the middle section. See some of the things that David said about this wicked man. That he doesn't boast in God in verse 4, but he boasts about himself, even his own sins. Like how successful he is, or how violent, mean, rude, or even dishonest that he is. Like how he can hold his liquor, or how many drugs that he takes. He doesn't even have God in his mind, let alone in his life. He acts like he doesn't even need God. Even though he fights against God, he may even use his name in every other sentence, but he lives and he acts like God doesn't exist because he knows if he stops to think about God, it's going to put a wrench in all of his plans. And yet, as you read through the psalm, you see that he becomes more and more concerned about God. In verses 4 and 5, you see that his plans are succeeding, one victory after another. And the more prosperous he becomes, the more he thinks he's impenetrable. 8 through 10, you see that he's like this lion. He's going to pounce on the vulnerable. He's crafty. He's setting up all these traps, and he's going to pounce on the poor and the helpless. And in verse 11, he says in his heart that God is forgotten. He's in his face. He will not see. He seems to be awfully concerned about a God he doesn't seem to think exists. And it goes to show that the wicked are not nearly as confident or as comfortable as they may appear. And so in verse 12, we have this continuation of David's prayer, and he's appealing to God for action. He says, just lift your hand, O Lord. And that's all it would take for God to punish the wicked. And so he says the reason why the wicked continue just to renounce God is because it makes them feel good about the things that they're doing. And so they just keep doing what they're doing and hoping God's going to leave them alone about it. But David appeals to God to break their arm. And that sounds a little extreme, but he's trying to get God to prevent them from doing their wickedness. So in verse 16, this God that they don't seem to think exists is the perfect king and judge. That he rules over the nations and makes them perish. That he judges with justice. He hears the cry of the vulnerable and the oppressed. And the oppressor's no match for God. He will perish, but God will prevail. What an incredible psalm. I hope you find that encouraging and helpful. And if you do, make sure to like, comment, and share, and follow for more studies just like this one.